We're here.
Hey, hey, hey.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good to be
Happy
with you, gentlemen,
Wednesday.
as always.
Hello, hello. We are live.
Jordan, enjoying the weather while we can, like you were saying, right? So that's always good.
May weather in Colorado will change on you like a dime.
Oh yeah?
Luckily,
Hopefully
we
you
don't
didn't
have, we
put
don't
it
have, we
all
don't
in
have a
the
problem here.
closet.
Not yet.
You
Nice.
guys
Awesome.
getting snow today or something?
This weekend. Sunny
No
today and then
way.
snow this weekend.
Oh man,
Love it. Good stuff.
quite temperamental.
All right. I think we got a couple things we wanted to kind of cover today. Some interesting articles, some always fun discussions, some fun topics. I don't know, Brian, you want to kind of kick us off this week, and what do you have for us?
Yeah, so the topic I wanted to chat about today was about the SEC basically doubling the size of their enforcement of the crypto assets and cyber unit. So, I mean, obviously, if you add 20 people and you double your unit, it wasn't a lot of people to start with. But to me, the biggest thing here is that like crypto's like for real now. When the SEC and the government gets
Officially
involved and
official?
they hire people, exactly, it's really becoming an official um, type of unit
Asset.
and group and enforcement. So they got 50 total dedicated positions between lawyers and investigators and different types of ranks, if you will, that will build this up. So I do think it's very interesting with this whole DeFi of the decentralization finance platforms, essentially, and then the NFTs really taking off. It'll be interesting to see how they start to enforce different rules and regulations with all of this. I mean, obviously, having crypto assets in the cybersecurity space is primarily how ransoms and whatnot are paid today, and a lot of business email compromise and all that stuff translates through that from the mules that go and do those wire transfer frauds, and it ends up in some type of cryptocurrency. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and then all the restrictions to nation states that you're not supposed to be paying to. I know a lot of people hire third-party firms to transact the Bitcoin, so it can't get traced back necessarily to that corporation. So it'll be interesting, long term, I think, to see all that play out. But the biggest piece of this to me is like it's not going away. The SEC and the government's going to go invest this much in it just because we see these big dips. I mean, the whole market overall's had dips, but we're seeing some very radical dips in the cryptocurrency world, and even some stable coin in the last couple of days is not necessarily
Stable.
as
Right.
stable as you like to say about that. So yeah, I just think
Yeah,
it's
I heard. Sorry, I
go
heard
ahead.
Bitcoin referred to recently as a stable coin in context of these ones that are even more volatile right now. It is an interesting place that we're in right now. I mean, it's not just crypto. Everybody expects crypto to be down 75% at some point, but when PayPal's also down a significant margin and other
Right.
large cap tech companies are also down, we know that there's other things going on.
Yeah, that's a
Yep.
good point. So actually, Brian, does this mean they're going to start paying all these employees in crypto now from the government standpoint?
Unlikely.
I know, right? Well, I mean, the government is looking into creating possibly their own cryptocurrency, right? There was
Yeah.
a order passed, executive order that was directed to start evaluating this, and so if the government's going to start looking into it, it may become a more and more serious thing. I mean, I'm shocked banks aren't lining up to try to fight this, or maybe start even creating their own that they can have some control over.
Yeah. It's going to be also interesting too because like this technology changes like daily, right? I mean, pretty much, right?
Hmm.
So, it's going to be really interesting for this group of people and these new employees, if you will, that are sanctioned with this to like really be up to date, understanding and kind of seeing where the tech is going. Not just from like a technical standpoint, but also from a security standpoint too. And I think we all know there's a lot of targeted around, like you say, cryptoware and, going after wallets and exchanges and things like that. So hopefully it's not just from like a, taxation standpoint and regulation, but really we're putting emphasis around like the security of crypto and things like that because it's huge, right?
I hope so,
Yeah,
because a big problem is the SIM swamming, right? Where they steal the SIM card, and Coinbase and Crypto.com, all these digital wallets have been victims of this, where
Yeah.
people get their stuff stolen. I mean, there's stories where they go break into the T-Mobile store, they steal the
Bingo.
iPad that has the manager's permission to flip the SIM cards, and they have like 5 minutes to do this. And so they have to go very quick to get into these accounts to be able to switch it, get the two-factor code. So if we can start shifting away from some of those and have apps installed on the for your two-factor instead of using texting and things like that to improve the security, I'm all for it. But I mean, this looks like it's more on the investigation side
Yeah.
today.
Yeah,
So
basically, it's
Sammy, I'm sorry. Go
validating
ahead.
that regulation and investigation is a real industry now, which also validates that the thing that they're investigating and regulating is a valid industry or a real industry.
Right.
Exactly.
Officially
yeah.
official. Congrats.
I think it's hard to deny the fundamental protocol. I think what we're going to continue to see a change in the landscape are the different bodies that kind of custody these things, and the different exchanges and how they have to comply with all of the different standards, including the reporting of transactions and large movement of large amounts of crypto from account to account. So I think. Yeah, it's as the we get more comfortable with what the protocol is and we start to implement it into various technologies, we'll start to get more clear regulation. And then I'm also curious to see which coins kind of stick around, right? Are ones that have an ability to be tracked more likely to stick around as they can regulate it more easily, as opposed to things like, say, Monero, which are a lot more difficult to track, right? I'm very curious to see what are the winners coming into the next 4 years, and what kind of integrations we'll see at the federal level. So very, very interesting. And
Yeah.
then, by the
Good
way, to your
stuff.
point, Ryan, maybe this will be a good use case for implementing FIDO passwordless security standards. So
Yeah,
that we talked about, right?
that
So
would be great to see some change with all of that.
All those nice things we spoke about the last time, right? So yeah, I mean, like you said, it all ties back to security in some form or fashion. So it'll be a good one. So okay. How about you, Sammy? What do you got for us this week?
yeah, no. I guess following up on the EDR crisis that we were kind of talking about recently, the DEA has reported that they're investigating reports that some more hackers have gained unauthorized access to an agency portal that actually taps into 16 different federal law enforcement databases. That is the Epic system portal, which we'll jump on that in a second, but it's basically Krebs on Security, the journalist, or Brian Krebs, the journalist, had received a tip from a member of KT, which is a really toxic online doxing blog, or forum, excuse me, that they, a certain set of hackers, I believe this time I think it was from Lapsus, were able to gain access to these systems and then therefore issue a bunch of different things. So what Epic does is enables users to remotely and securely share intelligence, access national Caesar systems, conduct data analytics, and obtain information in support of different criminal investigations or law enforcement operations. And so with access to that, as you can only imagine what kind of records they're able to look into. So things including ownership of motor vehicles, boats, firearms, drones, aircrafts, and then also ongoing criminal investigations. So you can imagine that with this kind of information, the amount of social engineering you can probably pull off against somebody, or and if you're trying to find information about your enemies, this would be a good way to do so. Also a good way to evade any kind of law enforcement that's coming after you. So and the crazy thing about this is this portal is publicly available to the internet. So you can actually access it at esp.usdoj.gov. And what you will find is there are two methods of authenticating. One uses a PIV card, but then the other is just basic password authentication. And you're not forced to use the PIV methods. So essentially, anybody that has purchased credentials from an online breach could leverage those to gain access to the system and then start to access the data that we were talking about. Also, not just to mention, but that not only can they view sensitive information, but they can also submit false records into this database. So thus, a little bit of psyop there, and yeah, a little some distraction and diversion. So this is, as you can imagine, if teenagers are doing this now, what a nation state with this kind of access would be able to do. So I think this definitely calls for some review of authentication requirements for this kind
So
of
I
stuff.
can
Sounds
log
like some
in.
Scary.
epic tonnage.
I can log in with stolen credentials, see all this data that they have on me and what they're tracking, and then go submit false data to put them on a different trail.
That's
That
absolutely
just
right.
blows my mind.
With some basic credentials. Yeah.
Probably not
I
even
look forward to the
MFA
episode of
enabled.
Law and Order.
Yeah.
What's that?
If we can get that episode of Law and Order, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. No kidding. Yeah.
It's kind of almost like one of those things like you see like in movies, right? Where they're like talking to like their quote unquote, hacker person, and they're stealing a car, and it's like, oh, hack into the DMV mainframe and change the license plate number. Like this is kind of what it reminds me of. Like, I don't know, it's just kind of funny like how sometimes, I don't want to say easy, but just like really, kind of makes you question a few things sometimes. So yeah,
Trivial. Yeah, I think trivial is the word here. It's like, wow,
there you go.
for this kind of access, all it took was purchasing a set of credentials online from, this is probably take place in
Those
under
things
an
happen
hour.
everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so I think to that point, I had, so claims that the DEA was accessed was shared by the author KT, who is the current administrator of Doxbin, which is the doxing community that I was mentioning about.
Right.
It's super toxic and whatnot. That person is also was reported as the leader of Lapsus, which is a data extortion group. For those who don't know,
I remember that. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, you can imagine that. The level of access that they're able to acquire with this. I lost my tangent there, but that's kind of an interesting thing to note here. That group was potentially behind the breach and actually had reported that to Krebs himself. So there's no what's it called, discretion here. They're loud and proud about their breach.
What's kind of what we talked
One of
about,
the-
right? Is for groups like that, it's sometimes less about getting in and more about the hey, because I can and like look at me type of a thing. So that kind of celebrity notoriety thing. So it makes it highly dangerous too in some regards, right?
Yeah.
One of the things sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just thinking broader than this, that one of the crucial issues that this brings to mind is the more that we enable access and storage of information, the more that we are enabling malicious use of that information also. So when we collect information, if we are storing information, if we are developing systems in order to access those databases, first party, third party, etc., we have to be very considerate about what the ramifications of unauthorized access are here. And the more that we are putting information systems together here, the more that we will see this, because generally the priority is getting access, putting it together, getting people connected to it, and then security, authorization, and things like that come secondary and tertiary. So always something to consider.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's where, we need to start to be able to identify these systems and then place stringent controls and enforce strict standards around them. It doesn't make sense to have something that sensitive publicly available to just about anybody. This is where the whole conversation on online identity and online validation of a proof of identity comes in, and how we need to pretty much enforce these systems by default on any kind of any databases that have this kind of access. I think right now the fact that there's no multi-factor authentication was required, and anybody can access the system just leaves a huge huge risk to that system. So whitelisting and more stringent controls here, I think, are the name of the game. We put a lot of pressure on private, but I think like I said, if a nation state gets access to this, you can only imagine what they could do with it and how they could cover their own tracks. So, yeah.
So no one said our favorite keyword so far, zero trust.
Right.
Doesn't that come into play here on this whole thing? Like it's just like you said,
It
it's just sitting there,
absolutely does.
sitting there
I
wide
shouldn't
open.
even
Like
be able to go launch this website. Like,
that's exactly
No.
what I'm saying.
Why?
I just
Yeah.
went to this URL, right? I'm at the office, so I don't mind doing it from here, right?
The van
But
shows up, we know what happened.
I don't need the black van at my house.
Yeah,
But
and I mean,
there's a warning system at the bottom, and all it says it tells you it's sensitive data processing only, and that you're subject to criminal penalties if you use this website. What is that? That doesn't stop an attacker.
right.
The challenge.
Yeah, it reminds me of the good old days when you get a banner that says authorized access only. Click enter to continue.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Next.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
lordy.
I mean, and who knows if they're even preventing, if they're rate limiting, if an attacker just coming here with
Good
brute
point.
force credentials, you know
Sounds
what I
like
mean?
a good job for like a future honeypot right there.
Right.
Well, that kind of leads into my news piece here, if you want to switch
Yeah.
topics. One of the things I was reviewing this morning was some guidance from CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency here in the US, along with our partners overseas, generally called Five Eyes. That would also include the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. They issued new guidance this week for the top 10 most exploited attack vectors. And right up there at the top, Sammy, is lack of multi-factor authentication. So going back to what you all just were discussing there, some of the other ones that I want to highlight, which a lot of this is in line with a lot of the standards and guidance that we've been recognizing over many years, outdated and unpatched software, inappropriately applied privileges, or basically just no permissions or bad permissions, default configurations from this is how it came from the vendor, this is how we deployed it, lack of strong password policies. If you allow me to set the password or any other 8-letter dictionary word, that's probably not a strong policy. Open ports, misconfigured services, especially when internet facing, lack of phishing detection and mitigation, and then poor endpoint detection and response. And they do offer some mitigation suggestions here, but these are pretty broad. They're things like use of access controls, credential hardening, centralized log management, employment of antivirus and detection tools, initiating and maintaining config and patch management programs. They don't tell you how to do those things. These are really good guidelines, but these are very tough areas for a lot of organizations, especially any organization that doesn't have strong established security culture, which are going to be the ones that these are going to be most applying to kind of implement this. So I think that one of the things that comes to mind is how important it is to develop a security culture. And from what I've learned, it's really only effective if it's coming from the top down. And that doesn't just mean the chief executives, that means even higher than them. That means the owners, the board of directors. If they care about it, then that kind of culture will get passed down. So I'd like to encourage that. Another thing that was mentioned there was, the password issue and authentication issue. So that also goes in line with the identity and FIDO passwordless kind of systems that we were discussing last week also.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about what you mentioned is you didn't mention 0 days. And
Right.
I feel like for some reason, so many organizations get caught up on this, like the unknown, where it's like more often than not, it's the simple controls that just aren't being done that are the issue.
Right.
The first one, you said MFA. It's like most systems in 2022, unless it's like some custom homegrown app, offer 2FA. So the issue to me there is that it's not getting enabled, not that it's not available. So that tells me that it's a resource issue or a labor issue that most organizations are experiencing as to why these controls aren't getting implemented.
A
And that's part of the
prioritization.
reason, right? The prioritization. Exactly.
If you're thinking about your attack vectors and you're going, yeah, but an attack helicopter could appear over our facility at any moment. Like, yeah, but do you have a security guard at the door?
Right.
Are you actually checking badges? Like, there are other things that we can implement that are much more realistic, that are actively being exploited, that we have the data that's implementing these changes does improve your security hygiene, your security culture, and the overall effectiveness of your security program there.
Yeah, I think one way to look at it, Sammy, kind of what you're saying is like if you kind of plan, Jordan, like if you say, look, if we're going to take our company and plan to do all these basics, because they really are foundation fundamentals, you're going to cover a way greater breadth of attack vector and being safe than focusing on just quote unquote 0 days and things like that, right? Like you can be so much more secure and things like that. And I think a lot of these companies, because we do a lot of consulting with them too, and the good news, Jordan, is we are seeing a big uptick in like the actual owners, founders, and boards asking way more now about cybersecurity, right? I think a lot of that's been driven because insurance premiums are going up, ransomware payouts are going up. It's top of mind. It's all over the news. So people are taking it, more seriously. But we still have the problem of like doing the basics, I think. And sometimes it comes back to this, we discussed before, like if you have a lot of technical debt and your company's kind of been around for a long time and you have, system upon system upon system, it's hard to go back and just like rip those things apart and rebuild them, as opposed to maybe a more modern, nimble company is kind of hopefully developing, security mindset first. So
Yeah, well, it's
And
like
that's not
which
to
one?
say,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, sorry. I was thinking about what Sammy had said earlier about how this doesn't mention 0 days. That doesn't mean that 0 days are not a risk. And while a 0 day does present an unknown risk, what we can consider are the known risks. And there was a list published also by CISA and Five Eyes last week of some of the most exploited vulnerabilities in the past year. And those were things like Log4Shell, proxy logon, Atlassian vulnerability, VMware vulnerability, Zoho vulnerability. So these are known vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited. At one point, they were a 0 day, but now they're known. And once they're known, that actually is when they become much more risky,
right.
because now that proof of concept, the exploitation can be shared around. And if these systems are accessible on the internet, they can be exploited en masse. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at the technical. Most of this falls under within the misconfiguration or the outdated software too.
Exactly. Yep.
By far. And there's a order of operations with all that old software. I mean, you go and try to upgrade the SQL server. Oh, the application breaks. Then you call the vendor and, oh, I don't have support. So now I got to go buy support to download the latest version. And then, oh my goodness, I have the wrong version of Windows and it's not supported on the version of ESXi I have. So you see how it spirals out of control oftentimes. But if you shift that and say go to SaaS, oh, we're just going to solve that problem and go to SaaS and not have to deal with this. Think about Office 365, not to pick on them, but if you go spin up a new tenant today, you get a whole different set of security parameters pushed down on your tenant immediately, versus if you were a customer from 5 years ago, they don't force all that stuff back on you. They'll give you some warnings and updates. Oh, we're going to turn off XYZ from time to time and give you an option to opt out some of the time, but it's never the same amount of security. So don't live with that false sense that you think you're safe and secure. Keep an eye up to date on those things. Check your security scores and different things that are coming out that you may need to go apply manually in your SaaS environments to keep them safe and secure.
Yeah,
SaaS is a shared security model, right? It requires that all parties involved act in the best interest of maintaining that security. There have been a lot of vulnerabilities identified in Azure, in the Amazon Web Services, and those will continue to be found. Hopefully, they're also patched very regularly too. But to your point, you can't just assume that, well, we have it in the cloud, so it's their responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't work that way. And people have that perception like, oh, it's somebody else's problem. Like, well, part of it's their problem, but still you own the data and you are responsible for, let's say, configuration and certain, IaaS and things like that. But yeah, it's not just this like magical, oh, somebody else has it, they take care of it. No, I mean, but a lot of times people don't realize that something bad happens and they're like, well, how come so and so didn't back up my data? It's like, well, it's still on you to back it up at the end of the day, right? So a lot of
If you're
miscommunication still.
if you're renting a space or you're staying at a hotel, it's still your responsibility to lock the door.
That's a good analogy.
You know,
Love
it's it. If you're they provide the facility and make sure the facility in and of itself is secure. That's not under your responsibility, but the door is a control that they give you the administrative access to, and you have to administer it. You have to lock it. So I think, people often think just because they're renting the house, they don't have to deal with any of the controls inside it. Just because you're renting a space in AWS or in the cloud doesn't mean there are not controls that go along with it. So I think that's an easy way to view it.
Exactly. So, guys, I got an interesting question for you. What do you think pays better, cybercrime or being a doctor?
Cybercrime.
Oh yeah,
risky.
cybercrime.
Well, ideally, if you can do both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, you don't have all that debt from going to school, so
Exactly.
cybercrime.
$800,000 worth of
Not for
school.
cybercrime.
So there's an interesting article I ran across today that kind of caught my eye. The FBI recently announced charges against a cardiologist. So doctor by day, cardiologist by day, and moonlighting as a cyber criminal mastermind, as they call it in the article, at night or even in the daytime too. So who knows, right? Developing and designing and essentially reselling ransomware, bragged about it on various forums. It became pretty well known. The name was interesting. Of the tool, it's called Thanos, which is interesting because I think Jordan, you pointed this out too. There's another kind of much older piece of ransomware titled Thanos. So I don't know if this is the same one or how this works out. It's not too clear, but basically he was reselling it. Ransomware as a service, up to $800 a month. He actually had great reviews, so great support. So I guess that whole doctor bedside manner applies well to cybercrime. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's just kind of interesting, that pretty much anybody can be involved in these types of things, right? It's not just these people you have this perception of sitting in a dark basement and wearing the black hoodies, right? I mean, it could literally be like your neighbor next door, in this case, like your doctor, like could be a lawyer for all we know, right? So
Yeah, can you hold the scalpel? I need to respond and provide good customer service over here really fast.
Yeah, like, oh, they're asking for my Bitcoin wallet. Hold on, type of a thing. So the story kind of just cracks me up.
If your customer base is on the other side of the world, and the claim was that he's in Latin America and the customers were largely in the Middle East, I guess that enables moonlighting. Yeah,
time zone differences probably work out, so. But basically, the FBI is involved. They're basically tracked down through PayPal accounts and a few other things. But it's just interesting that here we are still with ransomware as a service being just super relevant, super easy to operate in some of that regard, right? I mean, like it literally is run like a business, So customer support, renting it back out, allowing tuning, tweaking of the tooling, potentially profit sharing like we've seen. So just kind of goes to note and kind of be top of mind that ransomware is not going away, right? And cybercrime isn't going away. In fact, it's just ramping up in general. So,
well, what I find interesting about this too is some of the best developers I've ever met don't even have a degree in computer science. They have degrees in English, or they have degrees in accounting and different things, and they self-taught themselves how to program and code. So that's what I kind of find unique in this type of model right here, is that he was trained on something completely different, and then you picked up this skill on the side.
Yeah, I mean, if you kind of take that point, and like we talk about this all the time, like with just our engineers and people we talk to and hire, like if you have the ability to kind of go through medical school and like learn and understand like how the body works and like the actual rigor of going through it, you can go learn technology and things like that. I mean, like to your point, Brian, like some of the smartest people I've ever met, they didn't go to a formal college, they don't go to a formal school, and it's just amazingly, what they can learn from reading, watching, practicing, things like that. So to your point, it's more of that kind of mindset than like learning it officially, right? So,
and also let's recognize that a lot of things like ransomware and other flavors of malware are white labeled, rebranded, modified existing code. There's a lot of open source tools out there that can be packaged to become malicious, even if they weren't intentionally malicious previously, or take an existing piece of malware and then modify it for your own use. I don't know if that was the case with this particular perpetrator, alleged perpetrator, Perhaps it was entirely from scratch, but the point being that it's easier and easier to initiate a business like this than ever before, because you can use existing resources, leverage existing platforms, and find areas that are already trusted, whether it's trusted cloud providers, whether these are trusted file sharing providers, etc.
He could have had a whole branded operation targeting small doctors firms. Like, you never know, because he knows, like, hey, a lot of these doctors and small firms, they're just about growing their practice. They probably don't take cybersecurity as much as possible. So he, potentially it could be easy targets on his own peers too. Just not trying to give cybercrime advice here, but you never know, right? You got to know your audience.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right, gentlemen. Well, I think that kind of wraps up for today. Always good syncing up and kind of discussing these things. And I think an interesting kind of note is, we see a lot of the same basic things kind of coming up over and over again, and just kind of continues to show how important the basics really are in those kind of fundamental foundational things. So stay cyber smart, stay cyber aware, and protect yourselves out there.
Shields
All
up.
right. See you guys.
Absolutely.
Yep. All right.
Stay
Like
safe
and
in
subscribe.
cyberspace. Good to see you.